So good afternoon and welcome. Thank you for joining us this afternoon for the workshop. In Their Hearts Was Aroused of Hope, and leading this afternoon's workshop is Valerie Monson, who is the Executive Director of Ka Ohana O Kalaupapa. Her first experience in Kalaupapa was back in 1989 when she was 2 years old and a reporter for the Maui News. So I'm going to turn it over to Valerie.
Aloha and mahalo for this opportunity to be part of your AHA. I want to give special thanks to Ka Hess for suggesting this webinar and reviewing it with me, and also to Lori Yamashiro for helping for setting this up. In Their Hearts Was Aroused a Hope. For many of us, it's hard to imagine the early people of Kalaupapa having hope when facing separation from family, forced isolation in a strange place, a serious disease that was still not curable, and other hardships that would test the faith of so many of us. But Siloama Church was all about hope. These exquisite words were from a statement by J.H. Howe, the first treasurer of Siloama, when the young congregation was raising funds for a church building. Between 1866 and 1969, nearly 8,000 people in Hawaii were taken from their families because of government policies regarding leprosy, which we are now also call Hansen's disease. Their history has often been told inaccurately and sensationally. The story of Siloama, the Church of the Healing Spring, is one of the earliest stories of how hope, faith, and community helped the people of Kalaupapa rebuild their lives and rise above the terrible circumstances that they faced. Ka Hess told me that justice was an important theme of the Hawaii Conference. I've chosen 3 examples of the efforts to restore social justice to the people of Kalaupapa and their families. When the earliest residents sent to Kalaupapa established Siloama Church and put their faith into action. When Ka Ohana O Kalaupapa began helping families reconnect to their Kalaupapa ancestors. And the planned Kalaupapa Memorial that will list the names of everyone who was admitted to Kalawao and Kalaupapa, returning each of them to the history they helped to create and serving as a lasting symbol of justice. This is the Makanalua Peninsula that has commonly been called Kalaupapa. For those of you who have been there, this is probably a sight that stirs your heart and soul. The original settlement of Kalawao, where the early people were sent and where Siloama is located, is on the eastern side of the peninsula, the top left in this photo. Kalaupapa, where the community is today and has been for many years, is on the west. Until the late 1940s, people arrived at Kalaupapa in rowboats that had been lowered from the ships that brought them from Honolulu. There is an old myth that people were thrown overboard. We do not believe this to be true. As you can see, landings at Kalaupapa were often difficult, but we have found no evidence that people were thrown overboard. Why do we believe this? Many people were writing about Kalaupapa in 1866 and in years after. People who had been sent to Kalaupapa as early as 1866 were writing letters to families in newspapers. There were other newspaper articles written about life at Kalawao. Later on, people like Ambrose Hutchison, Peter Kaeo, and Father Damien wrote about the early days of Kalaupapa from their conversations with earlier residents. No one wrote about people being thrown overboard. This was a myth created later by Hollywood and novelists. Unfortunately, this myth persists. These were the names of the first 12 people who were sent to Kalaupapa on January 6, 1866. There were some family members with them who went along as their kokua, something we often don't hear about. And as we said before, they were the first of nearly 8,000 people who would mostly be forcibly isolated on this peninsula. Over the years, many of their names seem to be mostly forgotten. There are now 9 people who have the right to live at Kalaupapa, those people who were isolated under the old laws. There are probably 5 living there today. The number of them at Kalaupapa at any one time varies as people go back and forth to Honolulu for medical needs or other reasons. There are also workers with the Department of Health and National Park Service at Kalaupapa. The congregation of Siloama Church took shape in June of 1866, less than 6 months after the first people arrived. The 35 founding members were released from their home churches to form Siloama by an action taken up at the Aha Pae of the Congregationalist churches. At the time, there was no church building. The church met on the lanai of one of their members until they could raise money for their house of worship that was dedicated just 5 years later in 1871, complete with a bell, an astonishing accomplishment considering the harsh living conditions. The effort to build the church was summed up by the beautiful quote I used as the title for this presentation, a statement from J.H. Howe, the first treasurer. God's worshipers have been stirred. In their hearts was aroused a hope that through contributions in money, a church could be erected here in Kalawao. As we all know, the name Siloama comes from the biblical passage where Jesus cured a man of his blindness by rubbing clay in the man's eyes and telling him to wash his eyes in the pool of Siloam. W.H. Uvelealea, who had been a representative in the legislature of the Hawaiian Kingdom in 1864 and was sent to Kalaupapa in 1868, wrote a letter to the editor about the efforts of the Siloama congregation to build a church. He noted, "Our greatest longing is to make a memorial to God here." This is an incredible chapter in the history of Kalaupapa, yet it's very often left out of traditional histories or brushed over. Thankfully, that has changed. Helen Keau was sent to Kalaupapa in 1942. She was a member of Siloama and Kana churches, and I considered her to be a historian. She was so knowledgeable and put a great deal of thought into what she believed and what she said. During my first trip to Kalaupapa in 1989, it was widely spoken that the early people sent to Kalaupapa were so-called bad people who were doing nothing to help themselves. Helen did not believe that. She said that if all the people were bad people, there would not have been a Siloama church. Helen was right. This is the plaque inside Siloama. Any of you who have been to Kalaupapa are familiar with this plaque that displays the names of the 35 men and women who founded the church. One of the most exciting things that Ka Ohana O Kalaupapa has been doing is learning more about the people behind the names. As you can see, 3 of the first 12 people sent to Kalaupapa on January 6, 1866, became founding members of Siloama. J.D. Kaholiko, the first name on the admissions register, was the church's first secretary. In addition, the church records helped us to correct the spelling of Nahuina, the woman whose name was misspelled on the Kalaupapa admissions register. The reason we know so much more about Siloama and Kana Ho is because the leaders of those churches recorded so much of their history for us. This is Ka'iolani Hess with the ledger that contains the minutes from Siloama and Kana Ho, an astounding volume compiled by 16 secretaries of the churches between 1866 and 1928, but with minutes missing from March of 1894 to January of 1927. This register is being preserved at the Hawaiian Mission Children's Society Library in Honolulu. These minutes were on the verge of being forever lost, and might have been if it was not for this woman, the Reverend Alice Kahoko'oluna, Affectionately known as Mother Alice, she was the first Hawaiian woman to be ordained in the territory of Hawaii. Actually, she was the first woman, and for many years, the only woman ordained in the islands. In 1938, shortly after she arrived at Kalaupapa as kahu, Kananaho members held a cleanup at Siloama, which had been used for services, which had not been used for services as much as it had been earlier. Mother Alice discovered a small passageway under the church where she noticed a vault. And inside, she found a ledger that detailed the inner workings of the churches for so many years. A ledger that Mother Alice later described as something, quote, which no money can buy. These minutes have proven to be invaluable in telling us more about the history of Kalaupapa and the people. This ledger was written in Hawaiian, as many documents, letters, and newspaper articles were. When I made my first trip to Kalaupapa in 1989, I was told a very different history than what we know today. What I was being told back then, like what so many other people were told, was based on information exclusively written in English. But because of the resurgence of the Hawaiian language, we now have become aware of hundreds of letters, documents, and newspaper articles that were written in Olelo, Hawaii. And they show the people of Kalaupapa in their own words, in their own language, and in a much different light. This ledger is one of those examples. It was translated into English in the mid-1940s by the Reverend Henry Judd. The ledger not only includes the minutes of the meetings of church leaders for many years, but also pages and pages of names of parishioners. These minutes have been helping us not only learn about the operations of the church, but about the people themselves. For instance, during the first few years, the home churches of the members of Siloama were recorded. We can see the home churches of the 35 founding members. They represented 15 congregations from 4 islands. It's important to note that many people who arrived at Kalaupapa were already people of faith, so it made sense that they would want to continue to worship with others. As we have said, early people sent to Kalaupapa have been portrayed in a very negative way over the years, when in fact we know so many who were educated, upstanding citizens in their previous communities. We know that J.H. Howe was an attorney. And as I said earlier, W.H. Uvelealea had served with the legislature before he was diagnosed with leprosy. Because of these minutes, we know that Mr. Howe was a member of a Congregationalist church in Waialua on Oahu. Mr. Uvelealea belonged to a church in Kalihi. We have letters from J.D. Kaholiko and J.N. Loy, 2 of the first 12 people sent to Kalaupapa. They were eloquent writers. Ka Ohana O Kalaupapa felt these important minutes needed to be easily accessible to the public, with a special hope that the churches of the Hawaii Conference for the United Church of Christ would want to know more about 2 of their most significant congregations. The Ohana worked with Kalaupapa church leader Edwin Lele Pali and the Reverend Charles Buck, who was Hawaii Conference minister at that time. Award-winning author and Kalaupapa historian Onwe Law compiled the minutes and added additional information, quotes from interviews she has conducted over the years, along with photographs. These are signatures of the 16 church secretaries who recorded the minutes. Ka Ohana O Kalaupapa has heard from the families of 4 of these men. We have also found their names in other documents, showing us that future leaders of Siloama and Kananaho, just like the founding members of Siloama in 1866, put their faith in action by insisting upon truth and justice. And we have found the final resting places at Kalaupapa of 3 of these secretaries. This was the Ku'e petition against annexation to America that was signed by about 21,000 people across Hawaii in 1897, including more than 700 at Kalawao and Kalaupapa. We thank UH Professor Noe Silva for discovering this petition that had been forgotten for nearly 100 years. The signatures of two of the secretaries of Siloama and Kana, M.K. Makaena and SHP Kalavaya Opuna, are shown on this page of the petition. Church leaders taking a stand to show their loyalty to their kingdom. The structure most of us are familiar with, Ka Ohana O Church, was built and then dedicated at Kalaupapa in 1915. The name Ka Ohana O means New Canaan. According to a wonderful book about Siloama by Ethel Damon, Mother Alice asked some of the older residents of Kalaupapa how Ka Ohana O got this name. And they told her that the name Canaan recalled the memory of Ka'ina I Olelo Ia, the promised land that God gave to Abraham, the land flowing with milk and honey. It's amazing to me that the Protestant community in 1915 felt that life had improved so much at Kalaupapa since 1866 that they would call their new church the New Canaan, the Church of the Promised Land. People of Kalaupapa have always seemed to be grateful for what they have. I wanted to include a few stories of people who were important to Siloama and Ka Ohana O in later years. Unfortunately, all of these people have now died, but they are still very much a part of Kalaupapa. Ernest Kala, who was sent to Kalaupapa in 1931, was the choir director at Ka Ohana O and composer of Ina Kini, a rousing anthem that calls for young people to rise up and take action. He also helped to preserve the hymn Himene o Kalaupapa, the song of Kalaupapa, that was written by Samuel Kauvalu in the early 1890s. If any of you heard Kanani Kostala sing, you heard the voice of an angel. One of her favorite hymns was Amazing Grace. Those of you who visited Kalaupapa in more recent years probably knew Edwin Lele Pali. Pali was involved in many activities in the settlement and grew into a leader at Ka Ohana O and Siloama. During a period when there was no minister at Kalaupapa, Pali took control, coordinating services, delivering sermons that were both tender and humorous, and making sure that the church bell rang every Sunday morning. Pali was the last living Kalaupapa resident who was a member of Ka Ohana O and Siloama. He died in February of 2016. Catherine Puahala, the mother of Ka'iolani Hess, was another multi-talented individual, particularly skilled in arts and crafts. In her later years, she attended international conferences that brought together people from around the world who had experienced leprosy. They shared their lives with one another and found strength in their unity. Some of you with us today might remember the Reverend Lon and Ellen Rycraft as the people who hosted you on retreats in the 1990s through 2004. It was Lon and Ellen who started offering regular retreats to Kalaupapa for people from other congregations. Their retreat schedule, especially in the summer months, would have worn many people out, myself included. Lon and Ellen not only made all arrangements, they organized these retreats, which lasted a few days or longer, invited Kalaupapa residents to share their stories with the guests over dinner. Lon and Ellen even handled a lot of the cooking and laundry. If any of you received correspondence from Lon, he probably ended with his familiar sign-off phrase, "Peaceful justice, Lon." I'm sorry to say that Lon died a few years ago. Ellen continues to live in the home in Oregon where they had moved. She remains strong and is one of my closest friends. Ka Ohana O Kalaupapa organized in 2003 with the purpose of bringing together the residents of Kalaupapa, their family members and friends, to make sure the voices of Kalaupapa were always heard in telling the history and in shaping the future. Our three main goals were to advocate for the people of Kalaupapa, develop educational programs, and work in partnership to preserve the history. Bernard Punikaya was a champion of justice and the founder of Ka Ohana O Kalaupapa. Bernard was one of the great leaders in the history of Kalaupapa. Bernard was taken from his mother when he was just 6.5 years old and admitted to Kalihi Hospital on Oahu. He was sent to Kalaupapa at the age of 11 in 1942 and would go on to become a human rights activist recognized around the world. In Hawaii, Bernard was probably most well known as the leader of the movement to save Halemohalu, the residential facility in Pearl City that was an alternative to Kalaupapa. When the state announced in 1978 that it was closing Halemohalu against the wishes of the residents, Bernard led a 5-year protest of occupying the buildings, holding weekly rallies at the state capitol, and speaking up for the rights of people affected by leprosy. In the mid-1990s, Bernard began to worry about the future of Kalaupapa and that it would be directed by outsiders instead of by the wishes of the people of Kalaupapa. And it was his vision to bring together family members and friends to support the Kalaupapa residents. Bernard's idea was embraced by the residents of Kalaupapa, and this idea evolved into Ka Ohana O Kalaupapa. This was our longtime president, the longtime president of Ka Ohana O Kalaupapa, Boogie Kahilihiva, and a descendant, Momilani Motachik, during an Ohana ceremony at the future site of the Kalaupapa Memorial. Boogie was taken from his family when he was just 9 years old. He was the 4th child his parents had to give up because of the disease. As many of you know, Boogie died last year, an enormous loss for the community and for our Ohana. When Ka Ohana O Kalaupapa gathers at Kalaupapa, we have a ceremony at the future site of the Kalaupapa Memorial in Kalawao, where we speak aloud the names of family and friends who have died there. It's always the most emotional part of our gatherings. Helping families learn about their ancestors at Kalaupapa and getting to know them is one of the most rewarding parts of our mission. When the Ohana began in 2003, we had no idea we would be starting a movement of sorts. Through our Restoration of Family Ties program, Ka Ohana O Kalaupapa has now helped probably close to 900 descendants learn more about their Kalaupapa ancestors. These descendants are giving Kalaupapa a future. This is one of those stories. This is the Kalaupapa classroom in 1904. Look at these beautiful children and their debonair teacher. This could have been a classroom anywhere in Hawaii at that time. We've known about this photo for many years, but we did not know the identity of the teacher until I got a call from Aha Pae, the woman on the left, shown here with her daughter, Teresa. Anne asked if I knew of her great-grandfather named John Unea, who was sent to Kalaupapa. I told her we knew John Unea had taken the first census at Kalaupapa in 1900. She then asked if we had a photo of him. I had to tell her no. Anne excitedly replied that she had a picture of her great-grandfather and she shared it with us. Isn't this quite a portrait? Certainly not what we expect to see of a resident of Kalaupapa in the early 1900s. In addition, our historian, Anwe Law, immediately recognized John Unea's face from somewhere else. It was the face of the school teacher, and he was wearing the same suit. So we could identify the teacher as John Unea. This is what we love doing, putting names to faces and really getting to better know the community of Kalaupapa. We later learned from Anne that before her great-grandfather was sent to Kalaupapa, he had been principal of Hakalau School near Hilo. So, of course, he would have been an excellent choice to serve as teacher. We wanted to get a picture of Anne for an exhibit Ka Ohana O Kalaupapa was developing. We asked her to pose in front of Iolani Palace, and she asked us, "Can I bring some of my family?" This is the picture that resulted. We just love seeing all these descendants of Janunea together, all these different ages. Wouldn't he be proud? Henry Horry was a member of Ka Ohana O Church when he became very ill and was thought to be dying. He prayed that if God would let him live, he would build a cross to show his eternal thanks. Henry Horry recovered and enlisted his fellow Kalaupapa Lions Club members to build and erect this cross at the top of the crater, a stupendous feat of construction, strength, and sheer determination. I wrote the story about Henry Horry and the cross for Easter Sunday in 1996 while I was a reporter for the Maui News. A few years later, the family of Henry Horry saw this story. Until then, they did not know about this part of his life. The family later helped to restore the cross, which at that time was in need of great repair. We were so happy that it was Henry Horry's family who did this restoration project. This photo was taken in 2006 when the family attended an annual meeting of Ka Ohana O Kalaupapa. Henry Horry insisted that this verse be included at the base of the cross. Love never faileth, the Bible verse from 1 Corinthians. I have always thought this verse to be a theme of life at Kalaupapa, where love has so often seemed to triumph over the worst of circumstances. Williama Namahoe was born on Oahu and moved to California as a young man where he was living when he contacted us. He was searching for his great-grandmother, Kawai Koeahi o Kekuahivi, Wang Ho. As sometimes happens, it would be a long journey. 2 years after his first phone call, Ka Ohana O Kalaupapa found this photograph of Williama's great-grandmother. Kawai Koeahi o Kekuahivi had been taken from her family suddenly one day in 1907. Her daughter was just 7 years old. You can imagine the shock and agony of both mother being taken away and the daughter being left behind. None of the family saw Kawai again, and it was years before they fully understood what had happened to her. This pain continued to gnaw at Kawai's descendants through the generations, her daughter, her grandson, and finally, Williama, the great-grandson who was resolved to find his great-grandmother and put an end to the anguish he had seen his family live with for far too long. You can see there is a number written next to Kawai, next to her on the left side. This is another way the people of Kalaupapa were unjustly treated. In many instances that they were identified by a number, not a name, as if they committed a crime when they simply contracted a disease. I tried finding Kawai's tombstone at Kalaupapa, but was not able to do so. This is not surprising. Of the nearly 8,000 people sent to Kalaupapa, fewer than 1,000 have grave markers that can be identified. But then Williama and his wife's daughter, also named Kawai Koeahi o Kekuahivi, asked if their kupuna had remarried at Kalaupapa. As luck would have it, Ka'iolani Hess had just transcribed some marriage records for Ka Ohana O Kalaupapa, and I quickly found that Kawai had married George Kahukapu. After learning of Kawai's married name, I found this tombstone for Mary Kay Kahukapu. How do we know this was Kawai? Because we could match the death date on the tombstone to our records for Kawai. It was a chicken skin moment. There was only one thing left to do. That was to get Williama from California to Kalaupapa. No words are needed for this photo. Williama said that this journey to find his great-grandmother made him a changed man. A couple years after this trip, I was shocked to get the news that Williama had suddenly died. I spoke with his wife, and she said how he was at peace because he had learned about his great-grandmother and he felt closure. This is an important objective of Ka Ohana O Kalaupapa, helping families find closure and healing. Interviewing the people of Kalaupapa or just talking story with them has always been my favorite way to spend time there. But as more of my friends passed away, I had fewer people to visit. This is when I began spending more time in the cemeteries. And as it so happens, I feel like I've made a lot of new friends. I love figuring out who these people in the cemeteries are. And I always hope we will meet their families. We often do. This has long been a tombstone that interested me. Beloved and dearest Julia. Obviously, she was a woman who was loved very much. But who was Julia? This is where the research of Ka Ohana O Kalaupapa has become so valuable, as it has enabled us to make many more connections. All I had to do was a digital search of our records for women named Julia. Because Julia's birth and death dates were on her tombstone, I found her in our records in about a minute, Mrs. Julia Correa. I later found out more about Mrs. Correa, including the family she had to leave behind on Oahu, the names of her husband and 2 children, even the street where they lived. As things tend to happen at Kalaupapa, not long after I put this information together, a man came to Kalaupapa whose name was Correa. I asked him about Julia. He told me he didn't have any ancestors at Kalaupapa, but when I told him more about Julia's background and her family that she had to leave behind on Oahu, he realized she had been married to his relative. Soon after, Mr. Correa returned to Kalaupapa with his family. It turns out his wife also had family at Kalaupapa, so we were able to visit the grave of her ancestor too. So many times it feels like we are being guided by the people of Kalaupapa who are trying to reach their descendants. There have been times when I've noticed a tombstone at Kalaupapa that I haven't paid attention to before. And within a short time, I hear from one of their descendants. It's like the ancestors are calling. This is the reason that when people ask us, how many people are still at Kalaupapa today? Those of us with Ka Ohana O Kalaupapa don't say there are fewer than 10 people, but we like to say there's still about 8,000 people with us. It really feels like that. When Ka Ohana O Kalaupapa began compiling the names recorded in the Kalaupapa admissions register, I thought that was the list that would answer all of our questions. As it turns out, this list was just the beginning. Over the years, Ka Ohana has added information from a number of valuable records, registers, and other documents to our digital library that can now tell us so much about the lives of so many people at Kalaupapa. All this information has also made my work in the graveyards so much more interesting and fruitful. Many children were born at Kalaupapa, and not all of them lived. It's especially heartbreaking to see the tombstones of children who died as infants. This is baby Clara. Who was baby Clara? Once we had the Kalaupapa birth records, she was pretty easy to find. She was the daughter of Frank DeCambra and Wahine Kipi Keavi. Baby Clara was only about 6 months old when she died. When I saw baby Clara's name in the records, I noticed that another girl was later born to Frank and Wahine Kipi. They also named her Clara. This girl lived. So the name Clara seemed important to this family, but I assumed we would never know why. And then quite unexpectedly, I was going through some other records of marriage at Kalaupapa and saw that Frank DeCambra married a woman named Mary Clara Keavi. So I believe that Mary Clara was Wahine Kipi Keavi's English or perhaps religious name. Excuse me. Baby Clara had been named for her mother. Paul Harada, a man who was often deep in thought, was frustrated that the state of Hawaii never thanked the people of Kalaupapa for willingly giving up their chance at a normal life so others would not contract the disease. Ka Ohana O Kalaupapa was preparing a resolution to submit to the Hawaii State Legislature, seeking an acknowledgement of these sacrifices when Paul died in early 2008. With the support of Paul's family, we decided to pursue this action in his honor and memory, another way to restore justice to the people of Kalaupapa. Ka'iolani and I worked on this resolution. When we read the draft to the Kalaupapa community, Edwin Lele Pali stood up and said he not only wanted to be thanked by the state, but he wanted an apology for everyone at Kalaupapa who had endured so much pain and separation over the years. Other Kalaupapa residents agreed. They wanted an apology. Ka Ohana edited the resolution to include an apology for the pain and suffering experienced by the people sent to Kalaupapa and their families. The resolution was adopted by the legislature in 2008. The Kalaupapa Memorial is the biggest project of Ka Ohana O Kalaupapa. Many years ago, Boogie Kahilihiva told us that the Kalaupapa community has been hoping for a memorial since 1985. You can read his beautiful quote here about how seeing all the names together will bring tears to his eyes. Kalaupapa artist Ed Kato, such a wonderful man, was the first person who talked to me about building a memorial at Kalaupapa. Around 1990, Ed said, wouldn't it be great if we had a memorial like the Vietnam Memorial that would list the names of everyone who was sent here? At that time, I never thought such a thing would be possible. I never thought we would know all the names. Thanks to our Ohana historian, Anwe Law, we are now very close to that. We are just sad that neither Boogie nor Ed or so many others will be in the front row for the dedication of the memorial, but we know they will be with all of us in another way. We will feel their presence. Ka Ohana O Kalaupapa went to Congress to seek legislation that would authorize the Ohana to establish a memorial within the boundaries of Kalaupapa National Historical Park and display all the names. The bill passed both the US Senate and House unanimously, and President Obama signed it into law. During this process, there was so much support from the Kalaupapa residents, family members, friends, officials, churches, and the media. Even the Sunday New York Times, which endorsed the Kalaupapa Memorial on its opinion pages, showing that the memorial and the people of Kalaupapa have meaning far beyond our shores. Again, I want to give a special thanks to Ka'iolani Hess for being a huge part of this effort, working with Congress. The memorial will be located in the clearing at the upper left of this picture. You can see St. Philomena Church on the Mackay side of the road. Siloama is to the right, out of view in this photo. A field of 2,000 unmarked graves is to the left of Siloama. The memorial will be on the former grounds of the Baldwin Home for Men and Boys. This area has been vacant since the mid-1930s. The reason the memorial will be located here is because this is where the Kalaupapa residents told us they wanted it, and where people have always wanted it located since they began talking about a memorial. Bishop Larry Silva wrote how locating the memorial here near St. Philomena Church, Siloama, and all the unmarked graves will enhance the feeling of sacred space. The Reverend Charles Buck echoed those sentiments. This is the overview of the memorial. These interlocking circles have a meaning. The upper circle represents the people of Kalaupapa, and their names will be engraved on the curved wall around it. The lower circle represents all the families who were left behind when their loved ones were sent to Kalaupapa. Where the circles come together is what Ka Ohana O Kalaupapa has always envisioned, bringing the people of Kalaupapa and their families and descendants back together. This is the ground level view of the memorial. We love these beautiful words of Ka Hess, whose parents and other relatives were at Kalaupapa. How the memorial will be the everlasting presence of these people and a lasting symbol of justice. Descendants will be able to touch the names of their ancestors and feel an undeniable bond that they will carry with them for the rest of their lives. Olivia Braitha's quote says it all. We want to see all the names. When the Ohana began talking about the memorial, the people of Kalaupapa were adamant that the names all be together. Even though they did not all know one another, they feel a connection across the generations that unites them all. This was a procession of Ka Ohana O Kalaupapa to the site of the future memorial. The procession was led by Kalaupapa residents and a lead architect of the memorial. Last month, the state legislature unanimously approved appropriating $5 million for construction of the Kalaupapa Memorial. The bill has been sent on to the governor for his signature. There will be more fundraising. Ka Ohana has a goal of raising an additional $5 million for an endowment to make sure the memorial is forever maintained and cared for. I also want to point out that another proposal of Ka Ohana O Kalaupapa to designate January as Kalaupapa month annually in Hawaii was adopted by the state legislature last year and signed into law by Governor Ige. This past January was our first official Kalaupapa month, a tradition that we hope continues. One of the most important dates in January is Kalaupapa Sunday, the fourth Sunday in January, when the people of Kalaupapa are remembered in the HCUCC churches. Kalaupapa Sunday was the idea of Taka Harada, a longtime member of Ka Church on Maui, a founding member of Ka Ohana O Kalaupapa, and the brother of Paul Harada. Please let us know if you have ideas for Kalaupapa month or how you plan to observe Kalaupapa Sunday. We're happy to help you with any of your ideas. We have been blessed with so many photographers who have shared their pictures with us over the years and the many archives that have loaned us use of their photos. We thank them all for their work in preserving this history. And thank you all for being here today. This rock by Ed Kato, the artist, is not, you won't find it at Kalaupapa. It was a gift. And so if you want to see this beautiful rock, painted rock, you will have to come to my house, which is where it's at. Any communication should go to our website. There's an email you can contact, and we will pick it up and try to get back to you in a timely manner. Our website, if those of you have not been there, is a wonderful resource filled with information about Kalaupapa, materials that you can read or download, and 2 videos. So thank you so much.
We're not seeing any questions right now. We'll give people a couple of minutes to maybe add their questions. Oh, okay, here we have one. Do you have the names of all the people buried at Kalaupapa?
The ones that were, there was a cemetery study done by, I don't know if you know of a woman named Nanette Napoleon on Oahu. She's a historian who's done a lot of work in cemeteries around the islands, and she and her volunteers compiled a record of the graves that they could identify in, I believe it was 1991. And so we do have those records. And then of course, since 1991, I mean, I personally know where most people who died since then are buried. So, so we can identify a number of people, but certainly not everyone. And I'll tell you what, these tombstones fade. I have noticed, you know, stones that I saw so clearly 30 years ago have now, you know, faded. Not as easy to read. So just contact us. Yes, just contact us. Yes.
And if you're interested in purchasing a copy of Adjourn with the Prayer, the conference office has a number of copies So you can contact us also.
Thank you, Lori.
There are a number of our church folk who have ohana in Kalaupapa. So a lot of comments saying that this was very informative. So we want to thank you, Valerie.
Of course. And also, if people need to know more information about their ohana, they can contact us through email, and we'll do what we can to see what we have. Some people we can really find out quite a bit, and other people not as much, especially the very early people. But it's amazing to me how much you can find about people, who have passed away so many years ago.
We do have another question. Are families allowed to visit Kalaupapa?
Not at this time. Normally, yes, but because of COVID, the community has been closed for quite some time. They are slowly in the process of reopening the community, but right now it's just close family members or friends of the community. They're not allowing visits yet, but I stay in touch with the people over there. So when visits are allowed, we hope to start that again. And then also, I know that there are tours of Kalaupapa that people can contact. And of course, the tour is not, as far as I know, is not operating at this point either.
What should someone do if they want to donate to the memorial right now?
Again, you can go to our website and there's information there, or you can write to me and I will give you can either, mail a check to our post office box at Kalaupapa, or you can donate via PayPal. On our website, there's ways to donate that way too, or just shoot me an email. And like I said, that email is on our website. But we would appreciate that. I think that's really important that was one of the things that impressed legislators was the number of these very passionate and individual testimonies that came in from so many family members in support of the memorial and, the donations that we have been gathering.
Well, if there aren't any more questions, again, visit their website, kalaupapaohana.org, for more information and how you can get in touch with Valerie and make donations. And again, you can purchase the book, A Journey with a Prayer, from the conference office. So just give us a call. So we want to thank Valerie for awesome presentation. Thank you to all of you for joining us this afternoon.
Thanks so much, Lori, and to everybody. Aloha.